Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. It has taken me almost 3 weeks and about 60 hours of work to complete the basic shell of my Sheridan hotel. In this video, I will describe the methods and the procedure I used. I started with the windows and doors. Since I must cut openings for each window and door, it is important to have these ready to install. Here are the windows and doors I will use for this build. I began by carefully filing off all of the casting flash from each piece. This step is no different from any other kit, laser cut wood or plastic. Since the tops of the windows and doors must be arched to fit into the laser cut brick lintels, I glued a short length of styrene strip to the top of each window. I'm using evergreen number 132, 30 thousandths of an inch by 40 thousandths of an inch strip. Next, I filed the profiles of the window tops to match the curve of the lintels. I checked the top window profile against the lintels to make sure I had a good fit. As you can see in the inset, the two windows on the lower floor are noticeably wider than the upper floor windows. But the best windows I could find were just 4 inches wider than the upper floor windows. I decided to cut the mullions out of the lower floor windows. This will create the illusion that these windows are wider than they actually are. To reduce the chance of breaking the window frame, use the finest set of sprue nippers you own and cut a small section from the mullion first. This will allow the cut parts to spread apart more readily. Be sure to remove any nubs that remain attached to the window frame. I checked the doors against the HO scale photo of the building, and it was obvious that the doors were too wide. So I decided to trim excess width from the sides of the door frame. As you can see, the trimmed door frame is still a little too wide, but the appearance is much better. The doors had a wider frame at the top, so I didn't have to glue extra styrene. I was able to sand the door frame to match the lintel profile. With all of the windows and doors prepared, it was time to start cutting the walls. As I explained in part 2 of this video series, I cut my walls from 1/32 inch thick brick sheet. This material cuts very easily, but it is also very fragile, especially after you have cut out the window and door openings, so handle your wall sections carefully. I started by establishing the bottom location of windows on both the ground floor and the upper floor. I marked these locations with Tamiya masking tape. I lined up all of the marked wall sections to ensure I had a constant height around the building. Now it's time to lay out the openings on the wall. Here is the final taped left-hand wall. It took a little arithmetic to determine the spacing between windows, as you can see here. But once that's done, it's easy to measure the locations and tape the outlines of the windows and doors. With the openings marked, cutting the windows is easy. Just use a very sharp number 11 blade and take your time. Notice that I always cut from the corner towards the center of each side, rotating the work as needed. With a little practice, I found that I could cut an opening in about a minute. I cannot overemphasize the importance of using a sharp blade. I used 4 or 5 brand new blades for this project. Buy your blades in bulk. You'll spend between 6 cents and 25 cents per blade, depending on how many you buy. A sharp blade cuts more precisely, and it requires less force, reducing the chance of a knife slip. But remember to dispose of your used blades safely. Once all of the openings were cut, I carefully peeled away the masking tape. As you can see, the Tamiya tape holds firmly, but it releases from the brick surface without causing damage. Now it's time to cut the openings for the lintels. Since the lintels on the prototype appear to be flush with the rest of the brick facade, I had to cut recesses for the lintels. I used the carrier sheet with the lintels removed as a cutting template. I placed the opening at the top of the window opening and carefully cut around the inside of the opening. This sounds complicated, but it's not, and it gets easier after a little practice. I suggest cutting a few practice openings on a scrap of brick sheet to get a feel for the process. Once I had the hole cut, I inserted the lintel and then inserted the door or window to make sure everything fit inside the opening. Once all of the openings have been cut in the wall, it's time to trim the ends to make room for the brick corners. These corners are 1/8 of an inch square, and they form a portion of the two adjoining sides. This eliminates the need to make a difficult miter joint. I deliberately cut each wall to the full length to make it easier to lay out the door and window openings. This means a little extra waste. I will cut away and discard a total of 1 inch of brick sheet. An alternative would be to prepare a precise drawing of each side using, say, Inkscape, showing both the full length and the trimmed length of each wall with the windows properly positioned. Needless to say, I took the lazy way out. With the ends trimmed, it's time to laminate the brick sheet to the wall core. I'm using 1/16 inch thick basswood sheet for the wall core. I have cut a strip to the exact wall height, and I now cut off a length which is slightly longer than the finished wall. I will trim the excess length later. Once the wall core had been cut, I applied glue to the back of the brick sheet and carefully placed it in position on the wall core, making sure the top edges aligned perfectly. I laid the assembly down on a sheet of parchment paper and weighed it down with my 1-2-3 blocks to allow the glue to set. After about 5 minutes, I checked to make sure that no glue has seeped out onto the lintel gluing surface. If it has, it is easy at this point to remove. The glue has set but not hardened, and you can scrape it away with a number 5 blade. If you wait for the glue to cure, it will be much more difficult to remove. When you have cleaned away any excess glue, place the wall under weights again until the glue cures. I bought the 6-inch wide brick sheets, hoping that it would be wide enough to make 2 long walls, each 3 inches high. But as you can see, the 3-inch wide brick sheet was not quite tall enough for the side walls, so I had to fill in the gap at the bottom of the wall with some scrap brick material. I deliberately left the gap at the bottom of the wall because it will be more readily concealed by scenery. This of course meant that I had to measure all of the vertical dimensions from the top of the walls, not the bottom. With a little care, I was able to fill in the gap, and the seams are almost unnoticeable, as you can see in this image. Once that was finished, I glued the lintels in place in the wall opening, making sure I left enough space for the windows to fit. The next 2 steps are first, to cut the openings out of the wall core sheet, and second, to brace the walls to remove the curvature. I tried bracing first and cutting second, but I decided I prefer to do the cutting first. This means the back of the wall will be flat against the cutting mat and you'll get a cleaner cut. Also, once the openings have been cut, it's easier to place the bracing so it doesn't interfere with the openings. Start by tracing lightly along the openings with your number 11 blade. As the blade goes deeper, you can apply a little more pressure. Notice that once again, I am starting my cuts in the corners and drawing the knife away from the corners. It takes just a few minutes to cut through the 1/16 inch wall core. When you've finished cutting the opening, double check the fit by inserting a window in position. The fit should not be too snug. When we paint the walls, the opening will be a little smaller and the fit will be a little tighter. Before adding the bracing, I trimmed the core walls flush with the brick face, as shown here. Next, I cut about 18 braces to length. These braces should run from the base of the wall to the height of the roof. So unless you are building a sloped roof, the braces will all be the same length. Adding the bracing is a simple matter of gluing the braces and affixing them to the back side of the wall. I use spring clamps to hold the braces in place while the glue sets. Bracing on the front and back walls should be flush with the ends of the walls, and bracing on the side walls must be set at least 1/8 of an inch in from the ends of the walls. There is still a little more work to do on the walls before we can assemble the building shell. First, we need to increase the wall thickness at the ends of the long walls. This is where the wall ends will be glued to the corner posts. And since the corner posts are 1/8 of an inch square, I want the wall thickness to be 1/8 inch at these joints. The reason for this will become clear when we assemble the building. I used a length of 1/32 by 5/64 inch strip wood that I had on hand. You could use a piece cut from a sheet of 1/36 inch sheet, or ideally you could use some 1/32 by 1/8 inch strip wood. This piece needs to run from the bottom of the wall to the top of the bracing. Because of the thickness of the glue between the wall layers, you will likely have to sand the wall to the correct thickness. Take your time. The better the fit, the easier it will be to make your building square and true. The next thing we need to do is to install some mounting surfaces for the windows and the doors. As you have seen, the castings will pass through the openings fairly easily, so we need to make a way to make sure the windows are uniformly mounted in their openings. I used short lengths of 1/32 inch strip wood for this. I cut pieces just longer than the opening height and glued them against the back of the wall, with the strip wood overhanging the opening by about 1/2 millimeter. Be sure the overhang is less than the width of the window casing, or the strip wood will show through the windows. Next, I glued the corner posts to the front and back walls, but first, I double-checked to be certain that the front and back walls were exactly the same width and perfectly square. The True Sander by Northwest Shortline is perfect for this job. Notice that the brick corners have a top and bottom. The bottom of each corner is inscribed with the letters BB. Align the brick courses on the corner piece with the courses on the matching wall, then trim to fit and glue. I held the corners in place with trigger action clamps. You want a nice tight seam here. Finally, it's time to add the cornice to the front wall. I described the method in the last video. I simply cut 2 pieces of brick face to match the length of the wall, including the corner posts, and I trimmed each piece to about 5 brick courses. This is simply to make the pieces easier to handle. I will trim them shorter after the cornice is complete. Next, I start notching the bricks in the bottom course of one of the strips. I leave 1.5 bricks on either end and carefully cut out every other half brick. Be sure to use a chopping motion, not a slicing motion. If you try to slice the material, the wood will separate and the entire brick will pull free. Next, I glued the notch piece to a second piece, leaving 1 full course of bricks exposed below the notched course of bricks. I used white glue for this step. If any glue seeps out, I'd rather it dries clear than yellow. I placed 1, 2, 3 blocks on both pieces to hold them in place while the glue dried. To complete the cornice, I trimmed the cornice to length and trimmed off the upper courses. I wanted the top layer to be 4 courses deep, including the notched course, and the bottom layer to be 5 courses deep. Then I glued the assembly onto the front wall. If you want a more finished look for the tops of your walls, you can glue a piece of 1/32 inch strip wood along the tops of the walls. I'm using a different plan to finish the walls, which I'll explain during the painting step. At last, it is time to assemble the structure. Be sure that the 2 side walls are as square as you can make them, and that they are exactly the same length. The True Sander comes in handy once again. Start by placing the walls in your favorite gluing jig to check the alignment. All walls must be as close to perfectly vertical as possible, and all corners must be square. If a piece does not fit exactly, you should sand it or shim it as needed until the fit is as good as you can achieve. In dire circumstances, you may even have to fabricate a replacement wall. If you try to force an ill-fitting wall into position with clamps, it will almost certainly pull the entire building out of true, causing the base to become uneven. Before I glue the first joint, I want to show you how the walls fit together. This is the front wall with its attached corner post here, and the end bracing strip flush with the wall end here. This is the adjoining side wall, where we added a shim to bring the wall thickness up to 1/8 inch here, and with the end bracing strip offset from the end of the wall here. As you can see, the shimmed end of the side wall fits nicely into the corner formed by the corner post and the front wall bracing strip. Now you should understand why I told you to be sure the sidewall bracing strips were at least 1/8 of an inch in from the end of the wall. We don't want that bracing strip interfering with the square joint. Once you are happy with the fit, start gluing the corners one at a time, allowing each corner to set before gluing the next corner. Some modelers prefer to glue 2 pairs of walls together at right angles, then fit the 2 L-shaped pieces together for final assembly. This is a great strategy if your walls are absolutely square, true, and equally sized, but I am rarely that precise. I have better luck gluing the first pair of walls together, then fitting the third wall to the L shape. I can then insert the fourth wall into the open side as a check on the fit. If the fit is satisfactory, I can proceed. If I have a small adjustment to make, I can adjust the angles of the remaining 2 walls to distribute the error. I like to add one final detail before painting. I glue brick face texture to the inside faces of the building parapet. I think this adds a lot of realism to the roof, and it's quite easy to do. Here is a close-up view of the completed inside face of the brick parapet. In my opinion, this provides a lot of interest to the roof, which is the first feature your viewers will notice. Once the 4 walls have been glued together, it's time for paint. I always prime with Tamiya Fine Spray Primer in light gray. This will help protect the wood when I paint with acrylics, and it provides a neutral base color. Here is my best advice for painting bricks. Use several different colors. 3 is the minimum, but 4 or even 5 colors will give you the best effect. Apply some colors as a wash, and apply others using a dry brush technique. It is important not to make every coat uniform. You are looking for a multicolor effect. I start with a base coat. I am using a Tester's Craft paint. The color is rust red, which is very close to apple barrel Tuscan red. This is the only coat where I am trying for complete coverage, but even with this coat, if a little of the primer gray shows through, it's okay. Do not paint the bottom face of the window openings. These will remain primer gray for now. Eventually, they'll form part of the concrete windowsill. Next, I apply a coat of terracotta craft paint. Again, I am using Tester's Craft paint, but any craft paint brand will have a similar color. The exact color is not critical. All I am trying to do is to lighten the color. For this second coat and all subsequent coats, it is important not to apply a uniform coat. Allow the underlying colors to show through. When this second coat is complete, the brick is looking quite good, but the colors are too intense. They are quite realistic when seen close up, but to give your viewers a sense of distance, they need to be more muted. Artists call this effect atmospheric perspective. I'll fade the colors by applying a wash of apple barrel khaki. Again, don't worry about applying a uniform wash. Slight variations in color will work to your advantage. Also, remember that the wash color will fade quite a bit as it dries. You can apply as many wash coats as you like until you achieve the desired effect. Just wait for each coat to dry thoroughly. I'll finish the brick walls by applying some shadows and highlights with washes and dry brushing, using khaki, bleached sand, and raw umber, along with my first 2 colors. To finish the tops of the walls, I'm using some MIG beach sand texture. This will simulate the mortar used to cap the tops of the brick walls. Since this product contains small texture beads, I'll use a wet brush to smooth the surface of the texture as much as possible. I don't want this coat to be too lumpy. You can make your own textured acrylics by mixing very fine dirt or sand into the paint. Later, I'll color this texture with a mix of grays and tans to match the concrete windowsills. And this is the basic building shell after painting. In the next installment in this series, I will paint, glaze, and install all of the windows and doors, paint and install the windowsills, and fabricate the roof. Future installments will show how to add lighting, the balcony and sidewalks, and some final details which will bring the entire building to life. Stay tuned. I have included links to all the products mentioned in this video in the comments below. As always, I would love to hear your comments and questions. If you want to see more videos of this type, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.